Imagine this. It is the middle of the night. The sky outside is black. Rain is coming down in cold, steady sheets, tapping against the windows of a quiet neighborhood in Shelby, North Carolina. Every house on the block is dark. Every light is off. Every family is asleep, tucked into the warmth of their beds, dreaming the kind of dreams that belong to an ordinary Sunday night. But inside one small duplex on Oaks Road, a little girl is awake. She is 9 years old. She is dressed. And she is packing a book bag. She moves carefully, slowly, deliberately, because she does not want to wake her older brother sleeping just a few feet away. She does not want her parents to hear her from down the hall. She knows, on some level, that what she is doing is something she should not be doing. And yet her small hands keep moving. She folds something. She tucks something inside the bag. She zips it up. Then she walks to the door. She opens it quietly. And she steps out into the rain. No one sees her leave. No one hears a sound. The house stays still and silent as she disappears into the darkness of the early morning hours of February the 14th, 2000, Valentine's Day. Her name is Asha Degree. And from this moment forward, she is gone. Not missing in the way that children sometimes wander off and are found a few hours later, frightened but unharmed. Not missing in the way that ends with a reunion, with tears of relief, with a story that gets told at Thanksgiving for years to come. Gone in the way that breaks a family into pieces. Gone in the way that turns a small town into a place of permanent mourning. Gone in the way that keeps investigators awake at night for not just months, not just years, but for more than 2 decades. 24 years. That is how long the Degree family has been waiting for the truth about what happened to their daughter. 24 years of press conferences and tip lines and searches and silences. 24 years of Asha's school photo being passed around, held up, printed on flyers, shared across the internet as technology changed and the world moved forward while this family stood frozen at the edge of that cold, rainy night, staring into the darkness that swallowed their little girl. And then, in 2024, something shifted. Forensic science, which had come a long, long way since the year 2000, finally reached back into the evidence of this case and pulled something out. A breakthrough. Suspects identified. After nearly a quarter of a century, the walls around the truth about Asha Degree began to close in on whoever had been hiding behind them. But the story is not over. The questions are not all answered. And the full truth of what happened on that Valentine's night in Shelby, North Carolina remains one of the most haunting, most troubling, most deeply unresolved mysteries in the history of American missing children. This is that story. You are watching Cold Case Crime Lab, where cold cases do not stay cold. And tonight, we are going deep. Deeper than headlines. Deeper than the brief paragraphs you may have read online. We are going into the bones of this case, the night itself, the family, the search, the evidence, the theories, the breakthroughs, the failures, and the humanity at the heart of all of it. We are going to sit with the weight of what it means for a 9-year-old girl to walk out of her home in the middle of the night and never come back. Because Asha Degree was not just a case number. She was not just a statistic. She was a child. She had a laugh that could fill a room. She had a family who loved her fiercely. She had a future that should have been long and bright and full. She deserves more than a few paragraphs on a missing person's website. She deserves the full story. And that is what we are going to give her tonight. So settle in. Because this one is going to stay with you. Before we go any further, I want to take just a moment to speak directly to you, the person watching this right now. Whether you stumbled across this video by accident or whether you have been following this case for years, I want you to know something. The fact that you are here matters. Every single view, every comment, every share keeps Asha's story in circulation. Keeps her name alive. And in cases like this one, cold cases, unsolved cases, cases where the family is still waiting, visibility is everything. So before we go any deeper into this story, if you have not already done so, please take 5 seconds right now and hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Because Cold Case Crime Lab is here every week, going deep into the cases that deserve more attention, more scrutiny, and more voices demanding answers. You being here is part of that. You being subscribed means you never miss a case. And in the world of true crime investigation, missing even one episode could mean missing the very conversation that helps crack a case open. Subscribe. Hit the bell. And let's get back to Asha. Now. To understand what happened on the night of February the 13th into the 14th of 2000, you have to understand who Asha Degree was. Not just as a name in a headline or a face on a missing persons poster, but as a real child, living a real life, in a real community. Because the details of who Asha was are not just background. They are central to the mystery. They are part of why this case is so deeply, persistently baffling. Because everything we know about who Asha Degree was as a person runs directly counter to what she apparently did that night. Asha Celiace Degree was born on the 5th of August, 1990, in Shelby, North Carolina. She was the second child of Harold and Aquila Degree, a couple who, by every account from friends, neighbors, family members, and investigators, were devoted, attentive, loving parents. Harold worked at a loading dock. Aquila worked at a piano factory. They were not wealthy people. But they were hard-working people. And they built a home that was, by all accounts, warm, stable, and full. Shelby itself is a small city, the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where kids play in the same yards their parents played in, where the same families fill the same pews at the same churches Sunday after Sunday. It sits in Cleveland County in the western Piedmont of North Carolina, about 45 miles west of Charlotte. In the year 2000, the population was somewhere around 19,000 people. It was the kind of community where a child going missing was not just a news story. It was a wound. The Degree family lived in a duplex on Oaks Road. Asha shared a bedroom with her older brother, who was around 11 years old at the time. Their home, like most homes in Shelby in the year 2000, was what you might call pre-digital. There were no home computers. There were no cell phones in the hands of children. The internet, while it existed, was not yet the all-consuming presence it would become. Kids got their entertainment from television, from physical play, from books, from each other. And Asha was deeply embedded in the life of her family and community. She went to church. She went to school at Falston Elementary. She came home. She did her homework. She laughed with her brother. She spent time with her parents. This was her world. And by all accounts, it was a world she loved. Now here is the part that matters most when trying to understand what happened that night. Asha Degree was not a child who pushed boundaries. She was not a risk-taker. She was not the kind of kid who snuck out, who tested limits, who sought out adventure beyond the safe edges of her known world. She was cautious. That word comes up again and again when people who knew Asha talk about her. Cautious. She was wary of strangers. She did not like being alone in unfamiliar places. She was a child who, by her own nature and by her upbringing, stayed close to what she knew was safe. Teachers at her school described her as responsible, well-behaved, a child who followed the rules because she understood why rules existed. And she was afraid of the dark. Think about that for a moment. Sit with that. A 9-year-old girl who was afraid of the dark got up in the middle of the night during a rainstorm and walked out of her home alone onto a rural highway. That is not a decision that fits the child her family and teachers described. That is not a decision that fits any rational pattern of behavior for a 9-year-old. Which is why, from the very first hours of the investigation, law enforcement was confronted with a question that had no clean answer. Why did Asha Degree leave? Was she running toward something? Was she running away from something? Was she lured? Was she manipulated? Did someone have a hold over her that no one in her life knew about? Had someone been in contact with her, perhaps over time, building trust, making promises, creating a reason for her to step out into that rainy darkness? Or was there something in her home, in her family life, in her immediate world that we still do not know about, something that made leaving feel, to a 9-year-old child, like the only option? These are not comfortable questions. But they are the questions that have driven this investigation for 24 years. And they are the questions we are going to spend the next portion of this story exploring as carefully and as thoroughly as we possibly can. Because the answer, whatever it turns out to be, is the key to understanding what happened to Asha Degree. And right now, after all this time, we are closer than ever to that answer. But we are not there yet. So let us go back to that Sunday. February the 13th, 2000. The day before the night that changed everything. It was a typical Sunday for the Degree family. Harold and Aquila had taken the children to church in the morning, as they did most Sundays. Faith was a central pillar of this family's life, and the children had grown up understanding that Sunday was a day of worship, of reflection, of community. After church, the family spent time at home. In the evening, there was a basketball game on television. Investigators would later confirm that the family watched sports that evening, the kind of ordinary Sunday activity that millions of American families engaged in every weekend. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Just a family, together, watching television on a rainy Sunday night. At some point in the evening, the children went to bed. Asha and her brother settled into their shared bedroom. Their parents went to their room down the hall. By all accounts, by the time 10 or 11 o'clock came around, the house was quiet. And then, somewhere in the hours between midnight and approximately 3:30 in the morning, something happened. Asha got up. Now, what made her get up? What was going through her mind in those hours? Did she lie awake unable to sleep, turning something over and over in her thoughts until she finally made a decision? Was she waiting for a specific time? Was she responding to something, a sound outside, a signal of some kind, a plan she had made in advance? We do not know. What we do know is that at some point in those early morning hours, Asha Degree packed her book bag. Investigators later determined that the bag contained a small number of personal items. She dressed herself. And then she walked out of the house. The route she took is important. From Oaks Road, making her way to Highway 18 would have required walking through the neighborhood, navigating the dark residential streets, and reaching the highway, a stretch of road that, in the middle of the night in the year 2000, was not heavily trafficked but was not entirely empty either. Highway 18 in that area is a 2-lane road running through rural, largely undeveloped land. There are trees on either side. There are stretches where there is no shoulder to speak of, where the edge of the road meets the edge of the woods almost immediately. At night, in the rain, it would have been dark in a way that most people who live in cities or suburbs rarely experience, the kind of dark where you cannot see your own hand in front of your face unless a car's headlights happen to sweep past you. And cars did sweep past Asha. More than one driver reported seeing a young girl walking along the shoulder of Highway 18 in the early morning hours of February the 14th. This is a crucial element of the case and one that has generated an enormous amount of discussion, debate, and anguish over the years. Because here is what those drivers reported. They saw a small child, alone, walking along the road in the rain in the middle of the night. And they slowed down. One driver, according to reports, actually pulled over and approached. Asha, upon seeing the vehicle slow, immediately left the road and ran into the trees. She did not want to be found. Or, and this is a theory we will return to, she was afraid of something specific about that car or that driver. Not afraid of being caught in general, but afraid of a specific person. The witnesses who saw Asha that night did not call law enforcement. This is one of the aspects of this case that is genuinely hard to process, even 24 years later. Multiple adults saw a 9-year-old child walking alone along a rural highway in the dark, in the rain, in the middle of the night, and not one of them picked up a phone and called the police. Some of them may have rationalized what they saw. Maybe they told themselves she was close to home. Maybe they thought someone else would call. Maybe they were, in that moment, uncertain enough about what they were seeing that they talked themselves out of acting. We do not know their reasoning because, by the time investigators found them and spoke to them, the damage was already done. Asha was already gone. What those witnesses can tell us, however, is roughly where Asha was and when. And the picture that emerges from their accounts is of a child moving steadily, purposefully, southbound along Highway 18. She knew which direction she was walking. She was not wandering. She was going somewhere. The question that has never been fully answered is, where was she going? And why? By the time the sun came up on Valentine's Day morning, 2000, Asha Degree went to check on his children and found Asha's bed empty. At first, there may have been a moment of confusion. A brief, irrational hope that she had simply gotten up early, that she was somewhere in the house. But that hope would have dissolved quickly. Asha was not in the bathroom. She was not in the living room. She was not anywhere in the house. She was gone. Harold and Aquila Degree made the call that no parent ever wants to make. They called law enforcement. And within hours, the search for Asha Degree had begun. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Department responded quickly. The FBI was brought in, a reflection of how seriously this disappearance was being taken from the very beginning. A command center was established. Search teams fanned out across the area surrounding the Degree home, moving methodically through neighborhoods, fields, and the wooded land along Highway 18. Hundreds of volunteers turned out. This is something that speaks to the character of Shelby as a community. People left their houses, their jobs, their routines, and showed up to look for a little girl they knew of, or simply cared about because she was a child and she was missing and that was enough. They walked through the woods. They searched the creek beds. They called her name. Asha did not answer. As the search expanded and the witness accounts began to come in, the drivers who had seen her on Highway 18 in the early morning hours, investigators began to piece together a rough picture of her movements. She had left her house sometime after midnight. She had walked south along Highway 18. She had been seen by multiple witnesses over the course of perhaps an hour or more. And then, nothing. The sighting stopped. The trail went cold. Where had she gone? Had someone picked her up? Had she entered the woods of her own accord? Had she been taken? In the early days of the investigation, law enforcement pursued every possibility. They interviewed family members, neighbors, friends, school acquaintances. They looked at the Degree home and the Degree family with the scrutiny that is, unfortunately, standard in cases of missing children, because statistically, when a child disappears, the people closest to that child are the most common source of harm. Harold and Aquila Degree cooperated fully with investigators. They submitted to interviews, to searches of their home, to the kind of painful, invasive scrutiny that only adds to the agony of a parent who is already desperate with fear and grief. Nothing pointed to the family. Investigators also began trying to understand what might have motivated Asha to leave. They looked at her school life. Were there problems? Bullying? Conflict with other students or teachers? They looked at her emotional state in the days and weeks leading up to her disappearance. Had she seemed upset? Withdrawn? Frightened? Had she said anything to her brother, to a friend, to a classmate, that might suggest she was planning something or that something was wrong? Again, nothing clear emerged. What investigators did find was that Asha had seemed somewhat subdued in the days before she disappeared. Her teacher at Falston Elementary noted that Asha had not seemed herself in the week leading up to Valentine's Day. She seemed quieter than usual. Less engaged. Whether this was related to her disappearance or simply a coincidence of timing is something investigators have grappled with ever since. There was also the matter of a bookmark found at school. In the days before Asha disappeared, she had apparently been reading a book, a children's book that her teacher had given the class. A bookmark was found in the classroom that may or may not have belonged to Asha. It is a small detail, perhaps meaningless, perhaps significant. Like so many details in this case, it sits in the frustrating middle ground between clue and coincidence. As the days turned into weeks, the search widened. Flyers went out across North Carolina and beyond. Asha's case was entered into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. Her photo, that school portrait of a bright-eyed, smiling little girl in a red sweater, began appearing in post offices, in grocery stores, on telephone poles, in the windows of businesses across the region. And still, nothing. No confirmed sightings after that night. No tips that led anywhere. No body. No evidence of where she had gone after the last reported sighting on Highway 18. Asha Degree had, to all appearances, walked off the edge of the known world. A year passed. 1 year of searching. 1 year of anguish. 1 year of Harold and Aquila Degree getting up every morning and living in the terrible suspended state of not knowing if their daughter was alive or dead, not knowing if she was suffering, not knowing if she would ever come home. And then, in early 2001, almost exactly 1 year after Asha vanished, the earth gave something back. A construction crew was working in an area off Highway 18, not far from where the last sightings of Asha had been reported. They were doing excavation work near an old shed, a modest outbuilding set back from the road, partially obscured by trees and brush. In the course of their work, they turned up something that immediately brought everything to a stop. A black trash bag. Buried in the ground. Inside that bag, wrapped carefully, were a collection of items. A marker. A pencil case. A pair of hair barrettes. A book bag. Asha's belongings. These were items that had been identified by the Degree family as belonging to Asha, items that matched the description of things she was known to own, things consistent with what she may have packed in her bag that night. The fact that they were buried, deliberately, intentionally, wrapped in a trash bag and put in the ground, spoke to an undeniable truth. Someone had been there. Someone who knew what had happened to Asha Degree. Someone who wanted to ensure that this evidence did not surface easily, did not lead investigators quickly to whatever truth they were hiding. The discovery transformed the investigation. The shed itself became a focal point. It was a structure that some witnesses had recalled in connection with the area where Asha was last seen. The question of whether Asha had entered that shed, whether she had sought shelter there from the rain, or whether she had gone there to meet someone, or whether she had been brought there against her will, became central to understanding the timeline of her disappearance. DNA samples were collected. The scene was processed. Every inch of the area was examined. But in 2001, forensic science had real limitations. DNA technology existed, but it was not the powerful, sensitive tool it would become over the following 2 decades. What investigators could collect and analyze was significant. But what they could do with what they found was constrained by the technology of the time. The investigation pressed on. Tips were pursued. The FBI remained involved. The Degree family continued to speak publicly, continued to appeal for information, continued to refuse to let their daughter's case fade into the background noise of unsolved cases. And then, in 2009, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. 8 years after the first discovery near the shed, additional items belonging to Asha were found in the area. The FBI issued fresh appeals for information. The case was given renewed media attention. Investigators went back through old evidence, old tips, old leads, with fresh eyes and, critically, with the benefit of advances in forensic science that had occurred in the years since 2001. New interviews were conducted. Old witnesses were recontacted. The expanding capabilities of DNA analysis and other forensic tools allowed investigators to do things in 2009 that simply had not been possible in 2001 or in 2000. Still, no arrest. Still, no definitive answer to the central question, what happened to Asha Degree? But the case was building. Quietly, steadily, the net was drawing tighter around whatever truth lay at the center of this mystery. Investigators who worked the case over the years have described the accumulation of evidence as a slow but relentless process, each piece adding to the picture, each advancement in science allowing them to revisit and reinterpret evidence that had been sitting in storage, waiting for the moment when the tools would finally be powerful enough to unlock it. That moment, it seems, finally arrived in 2024. Before we get to that breakthrough, I want to pause for a moment and talk about something that is easy to overlook when you are focused on the facts and the timeline of a case like this. I want to talk about what it is like to be the family of a missing child. Not in a general, abstract way. In the specific, grinding, daily reality of it. Harold and Asha Degree have been living with the disappearance of their daughter for 24 years. Think about what that means in concrete terms. 24 birthdays that Asha was not there for. 24 Christmases. 24 Valentine's Days, every single one of which is an anniversary, a marker of the night their world was split in two. They have watched their surviving child grow up, grow older, build a life. They have watched the world change beyond recognition, the internet exploding into every aspect of human life, smartphones appearing in every pocket, social media transforming how information travels and how communities form and dissolve. They have watched forensic science advance to the point where cases that seemed permanently unsolvable began to yield their secrets. And through all of it, they have held on. They have continued to speak to the media when asked. They have continued to appeal for information. They have maintained the quiet, dignified persistence of people who refuse to accept that the truth about their daughter will never be known. In interviews over the years, Harold Degree in particular has spoken with a calm, measured grief that is almost unbearable to witness. He has said, in various ways and at various times, that he simply wants to know what happened to his daughter. Not closure, that word gets used a lot in these situations, and it is a word that many families of missing and murdered children have pushed back against, because there is no closure when your child is gone. But knowing. The simple, devastating gift of knowing. Of having a truth to hold, however painful it might be, rather than living in the endless uncertainty of not knowing. That is what the Degree family has been waiting for. And that is what investigators, over 24 years, have been trying to give them. Let us talk about the theories that have circulated over the years. Because in a case like this, where the facts are few and the questions are many, theories proliferate. Some of them are more credible than others. Some of them have been seriously investigated by law enforcement. Some of them exist primarily in the realm of online speculation. All of them reflect the genuine confusion and anguish of people trying to make sense of something that refuses to make sense. The first and most persistent question in this case is the one we have already touched on: did Asha leave of her own free will, or was she taken? On the surface, this might seem like a straightforward question. She was seen walking on the highway by multiple witnesses. She ran from one driver who appeared to approach her. This suggests she was ambulatory, unrestrained, moving under her own power. But the fact that someone walks somewhere does not mean they are doing so freely in the full sense of the word. Children can be manipulated, coerced, threatened. A child can be made to believe that walking somewhere at night is necessary, even urgent, without anyone physically forcing them. A phone call in the middle of the night. A threat. A promise. A carefully crafted deception. Any of these could cause a cautious, rule-following 9-year-old to do something that seems, from the outside, entirely out of character. This leads to the second major theory that has been discussed extensively in connection with this case, the idea that Asha had been in contact with someone, an adult, most likely, who had been grooming her, building a relationship with her, and ultimately creating a reason for her to come to them that night. Now, in the year 2000, child sexual predators operated very differently than they do today. The internet existed but was not yet the primary hunting ground it would become. Predators in 2000 more commonly worked through direct community contact, through churches, schools, neighborhoods, recreational programs, anywhere they could gain access to children and begin the slow, careful process of building trust and manipulating vulnerability. Investigators have always taken seriously the possibility that someone in or connected to Asha's community had been engaging with her in ways that her family was not aware of. Someone who had, over time, convinced her that she could trust them. Someone who had created a compelling enough reason, a promise of something exciting, a threat of something frightening, an appeal to her emotions or her loyalty, to get her out of that house in the middle of the night. The fact that she packed her bag suggests premeditation. She was not startled out of bed and dragged out of the house. She made a decision, acted on it, and prepared for it, at least minimally. That bag, those items she chose to bring with her, suggests she was planning to be gone for a while. Planning to go somewhere specific. Where? With whom? Then there is the theory, or rather the family of theories, that centers on something happening within the home or family environment that we still do not fully understand. Law enforcement investigated the family thoroughly and found nothing to support the idea that Asha was fleeing abuse or danger within her household. Harold and Asha Degree were, by all accounts, good parents who loved their children. The home was stable, functional, and by no means a place of fear or harm. And yet, the subdued behavior in the week before she disappeared. The sense that something was on her mind. The deliberate, middle-of-the-night departure. Was there a fight? A moment of conflict that a 9-year-old magnified in her mind to something larger than it actually was? Children sometimes make enormous decisions based on very small triggers, a harsh word, a misunderstanding, a fear of consequences for something they had done or hadn't done. Is it possible that Asha was frightened about something at school, or at home, and decided that running away was the answer? If so, running to where? And why Highway 18 in the middle of the night? Where was she going? The shed off Highway 18 has been central to this discussion from the moment her belongings were found buried there. Someone buried those items. Someone who knew she had been in that area. Someone who was cleaning up evidence. Was that person a local? Someone who drove past that area regularly, who knew about the shed, who had reason to be there that night or in the days that followed? Was it someone who encountered Asha on the highway, by accident or by design, and whose encounter with her ended in tragedy? Or was it someone who had planned the entire thing? Someone who had arranged to meet Asha at a specific location, who had been waiting for her to arrive, and who, after whatever happened, had returned to that location to bury the evidence of his or her presence. Over the years, investigators have looked at dozens of people in connection with this case. Some of them have been named publicly. Most have not. Some were cleared. Others remained in what investigators call a status of interest, not officially named as suspects, but not cleared either, sitting in that uncomfortable gray zone of unresolved scrutiny. And then came 2024. The forensic breakthrough of 2024 represents the most significant development in the Asha Degree case since the discovery of her belongings in 2001. To understand why it is significant, it helps to understand a little about how forensic science has changed in the past 2 decades, because the change has been genuinely revolutionary. In the year 2000, DNA analysis required relatively large samples. The technology for working with degraded, old, or partial DNA was in its relative infancy. Investigators could collect DNA from a scene, but what they could do with it, how small a sample they could work with, how degraded the material could be, how partial a profile they could match, was significantly more limited than what is possible today. Over the following 2 decades, forensic science underwent a transformation. Techniques like low copy number DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, and advances in touch DNA processing have fundamentally changed what investigators can do with evidence that seemed, in the early 2000s, to be telling them nothing. Genetic genealogy, in particular, has become a powerful tool in cold cases. This is the technique that was used to identify the Golden State Killer in California after 40 years. It involves taking a DNA profile from evidence and, rather than trying to match it directly to a known offender in a criminal database, running it through genealogy databases used by ordinary people to find relatives. From those relative connections, investigators can build family trees, narrow down suspects, and ultimately identify someone even if they have never been in a criminal DNA database. This approach has cracked cases that seemed permanently frozen. It has put names to unidentified victims. It has identified suspects in crimes that occurred before some of the investigators working them were even born. In the Asha Degree case, the forensic advancements of 2024 allowed investigators to do things with evidence from the shed, from the buried items, from materials collected at the scene over the years, that had simply not been possible before. The result, as law enforcement has publicly confirmed, was the identification of key suspects. The specific names have not been fully disclosed, as is standard in ongoing investigations where charges have not yet been filed or where the legal process requires a degree of confidentiality to protect the integrity of potential prosecutions. But the confirmation itself, the statement from investigators that suspects have been identified, represents a seismic shift in the landscape of this case. After 24 years of silence, after 24 years of the most devastating kind of not knowing, the truth about what happened to Asha Degree appears to finally be within reach. For Harold and Aquila Degree, the announcement must have landed with an almost unbearable mixture of hope and dread. Hope because answers may finally be coming. Dread because answers, in a case like this, are unlikely to be anything but heartbreaking. No answer that requires 24 years and a forensic breakthrough to arrive is going to be a gentle one. But knowing, even painful knowing, is better than the void. Better than the endless night of uncertainty that this family has been living in for more than 2 decades. And whatever those answers turn out to be, Harold and Aquila Degree have earned the right to receive them. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words "I am still here." Let us see who is truly following this story. Because what we are about to get into goes even deeper, the specific theories, the overlooked details, the questions that investigators have never fully answered publicly, and the significance of what the 2024 breakthrough might actually mean for bringing this case to its final resolution. Drop that comment. Let me know you are with me. And let us keep going. Let us talk about the geography of this case, because it matters more than it might initially seem. Shelby, North Carolina sits at a specific intersection of Southern American geography and culture. It is a small city with deep roots, a textile town, historically, with the kind of community bonds that develop when families work the same industries, attend the same churches, and live in the same neighborhoods for generations. It is the kind of place where people know each other. Where strangers are noticed. Where a child walking alone on a highway in the middle of the night would, under normal circumstances, be something that got talked about the next morning. And yet, the witnesses who saw Asha on Highway 18 that night did not talk about it. Not immediately. Not until investigators started asking. Why not? This is something that has puzzled people who study this case. Multiple adults saw a small child alone on a dark highway in the rain in the middle of the night. In a community where people know each other, where children are looked after collectively, where the norms of small-town life presumably include looking out for one another, why did not a single one of those witnesses make a phone call? There are several possible explanations. The most charitable is simple hesitation, the momentary confusion of encountering something unexpected, the brief window in which action is possible that closes before the person fully processes what they have seen. Human beings are not always decisive in moments that require decisive action. Witnesses in crimes and emergencies frequently report the same thing: they saw something, they felt something was wrong, but they did not act because they were uncertain, or confused, or because they told themselves someone else would handle it. Another possibility, darker and more uncomfortable, is that some of those witnesses knew more than they let on. Not necessarily that they were involved in whatever happened to Asha, but that they recognized her, or recognized something about the situation, that made them actively choose not to call the police. This is speculative. But in a community as tightly interconnected as Shelby, in a case where the evidence points to someone known to Asha or her family, the question of what the witnesses on Highway 18 that night actually knew, and chose not to share immediately, has never been fully resolved. Highway 18 itself is worth dwelling on. If you drive that stretch of road today, you are driving through the same basic landscape that existed in 2000. Trees press close on either side in places. The road is narrow. At night, away from the lights of the city, the darkness is absolute. It is not the kind of road you want to be on alone in the middle of the night. It is certainly not the kind of road you would expect a 9-year-old child to be walking along in a rainstorm. The shed that became so significant in the investigation sits off this road at a point that is walking distance from the Degree home, not a long distance, perhaps less than 2 miles, but 2 miles on foot, at night, in the rain, feels like an enormous distance when you are 9 years old and you are afraid of the dark. And yet Asha made it at least that far. The evidence of her buried belongings places her in that area. The question of what happened when she arrived there, or what happened to her on the way there, is the question at the center of everything. Let us talk about the specific items that were found buried near the shed in 2001, because the details of what was there, and perhaps more importantly, what was not there, tell a story. The items recovered included a pencil case, hair barrettes, a marker, a book bag. These are the kinds of items you might find in any child's backpack. They are school supplies, personal accessories, the small everyday objects that fill a child's daily life. What they are not is everything. If Asha packed a bag that night, she presumably put more than a pencil case and some hair accessories in it. What else was in that bag? What else did she bring with her? And where is it? The fact that these particular items were wrapped in a trash bag and buried suggests that whoever buried them was being selective. They were not burying everything associated with Asha's presence. They were burying specific things, perhaps things that could be connected to them, perhaps things that bore trace evidence, perhaps things that told a story they wanted to remain untold. What is not there is as significant as what is. The absence of certain items in the buried evidence raises questions about what else existed and where it went. If Asha had clothing on when she was last seen, where is it? If she had other personal items, a book, perhaps, or something given to her by the person she may have been going to meet, where are those things? Investigators have presumably asked these questions. The answers, if they exist, have not been made public. I want to spend some time on something that I think gets overlooked in many discussions of this case, and that is the role of time. Not just the passage of time in terms of the investigation, but the specific temporal context of February 14, 2000. Because the year 2000 was a very specific moment in American history, and that moment matters for understanding this case. The year 2000 was a time of transition. The internet existed, but it was not yet what it is today. Social media did not exist. Smartphones did not exist. The surveillance infrastructure that we now take for granted, the cameras on every corner, the GPS tracking in every device, the digital footprints left by every human being every single hour of every single day, essentially did not exist in any meaningful way in 2000. This has profound implications for the investigation of Asha's disappearance. In the world we live in today, it is almost impossible for a 9-year-old child to walk out of a house, travel 2 miles on a highway, and interact with people along the way without leaving an enormous trail of electronic evidence. Cell phone towers would capture signals. Traffic cameras would record images. Digital payment systems would note purchases. The online activity of anyone who had been in contact with the child would be scrutinized and traced. In 2000, none of that existed. The only evidence of Asha's movements that night came from human witnesses, people who happened to be driving on Highway 18 in the middle of the night, people who may or may not have been paying full attention, people who may or may not have had perfect memories, people who may or may not have come forward with everything they knew. This means that the physical evidence, the DNA, the fibers, the trace materials recovered from the shed and from the buried items, is all the more precious. It is, in many ways, the only reliable record of what happened that night. Which is precisely why the forensic advancements of 2024 are so significant. Because those physical traces, small as they are, degraded as they became over 24 years, turned out to hold answers that human witnesses could not or would not provide. There is something that I think needs to be said plainly about how cases like this one have historically been handled, and how they are handled today. And this is not a criticism of any particular person or agency, but rather an observation about systems and about how those systems can fail the families they are meant to serve. Missing children cases in America do not all receive the same level of attention and resources. This is a documented reality that researchers, advocates, and journalists have written about extensively. Cases involving children of color, children from lower-income backgrounds, and children from communities without political and social capital frequently receive less media coverage, fewer investigative resources, and less sustained public attention than cases involving white children, children from middle-class or upper-class backgrounds, or children in communities with more access to power. Asha Degree is a black girl from a working-class family in a small southern city. Her case did receive significant attention, the FBI was involved from early on, and the case remained active for years. But it is worth asking whether a different child, in different circumstances, would have received even more attention. Whether the resources applied to this case from the beginning would have been different if Asha had been someone else. This is not a comfortable question. But it is a necessary one. And it is a question that advocates for missing and exploited children have been raising for decades. The good news, if there is good news to be found in any of this, is that the forensic breakthrough of 2024 was made possible in part by the sustained advocacy of people who refused to let this case be forgotten. By journalists who kept writing about it. By podcasters and YouTube creators who brought it to new audiences. By the Degree family themselves, who never stopped speaking their daughter's name. By the advocates and volunteers who periodically breathed fresh oxygen into the investigation. Visibility matters. Sustained attention matters. The people who kept asking questions about Asha Degree over 24 years are, in a very real sense, part of why this case is now closer than ever to a resolution. Which brings us back to you. The person watching this video. Because your attention, your engagement, your decision to share this story with someone else, that is part of the same continuum. Cases stay alive when people keep talking about them. And the cases that stay alive are the ones that eventually get solved. Let us go back to the timeline and fill in some of the details we have not yet fully explored. In the weeks and months immediately following Asha's disappearance, investigators made a number of specific inquiries that became part of the public record of this case. Let us walk through some of them. First, the family home itself. Investigators examined the duplex on Oaks Road thoroughly. They were looking for any evidence of what might have prompted Asha to leave: conflict, disturbance, signs of fear. They found nothing that indicated a struggle or a forced removal. Asha had clearly left of her own volition. Her bed had been slept in. Her room was essentially normal. The only notable thing was what was missing: her book bag, packed and gone. Investigators also paid close attention to Asha's school. Falston Elementary, where Asha was a student. They spoke with her teachers, who described her as a good student, well-behaved, well-liked. They spoke with her classmates. They looked at her recent work, her behavior in the days before the 14th. It was at school that they learned about the week of relative quietness, the sense that something had been on Asha's mind. One of the persistent questions in the case is whether Asha had communicated to anyone, a friend, a classmate, that she was planning to do something. Children often confide in each other. Did Asha tell anyone where she was going? Did she share even a hint of what she was thinking? If she did, no one has come forward with that information. But the question has never been fully put to rest. The church the family attended was also part of the investigative focus. Faith communities are, by their nature, places of trust and connection. They are also places where adults have access to children in contexts that can, if the wrong person is involved, create opportunities for manipulation and harm. Investigators looked at the church community. They spoke with people who knew the family through their faith life. Again, nothing definitive emerged. The neighborhood around Oaks Road was canvassed extensively. Neighbors were interviewed. People were asked if they had seen anything, heard anything, noticed anything unusual in the days before or the night of the disappearance. The picture that emerged was of a quiet residential area, normal activity, nothing out of the ordinary. And then there is the matter of Highway 18 itself, and the specific question of whether anyone had reason to be on that road in the middle of the night, not just driving through, but stopping, waiting, possibly meeting someone. In rural North Carolina in the year 2000, isolated stretches of road served various purposes that did not always bear scrutiny. People met in such places. Deals were made. Activities occurred that people preferred to keep hidden from their neighbors and families. Whether any of those activities intersected with Asha Degree on the night of February the 13th into the 14th is something investigators have explored without, as of the time of this recording, fully resolving publicly. The shed. Let us spend more time on the shed, because it deserves it. The structure near which Asha's belongings were found buried was, in the year 2000, an unremarkable outbuilding, the kind of old shed that exists on the edges of rural properties across the South. It was not a prominent landmark. It was not the kind of place that would attract attention under normal circumstances. But it was a known place. People in the area knew it existed. And its proximity to the last confirmed sightings of Asha on Highway 18 places it squarely in the geography of her final known movements. The question of whether Asha entered that shed voluntarily, was brought there by force, or was simply in the area when something happened to her, has never been definitively answered. But the burial of her belongings nearby is evidence of something specific and significant. It is evidence that someone returned to that location after Asha was last seen alive, and took deliberate action to conceal evidence of her presence there. That is not the action of a stranger who had no particular connection to the case. That is not something that happens by accident. Someone knew those items were there. Someone had reason to want them not found. Someone took the risk of returning to a location that may have been under scrutiny, or may have been expected to come under scrutiny, in order to hide that evidence. That someone is, almost certainly, the key to this case. Who had knowledge of that shed? Who had reason to be on that stretch of Highway 18 late at night or in the days following Asha's disappearance? Who, upon hearing that a 9-year-old girl had gone missing from a location that was very close to that shed, would have felt compelled to go there and bury evidence? These are the questions that investigators have been working toward for 24 years. And the forensic science of 2024 has, apparently, brought them finally to some answers. Let us talk about what a forensic breakthrough in 2024 actually looks like in practical terms. Because understanding the mechanics of it helps understand why it matters so much. The evidence collected from the scene near the shed in 2000 and 2001 was preserved. This is standard practice in unsolved cases. Evidence is maintained in controlled conditions specifically so that it can be reanalyzed as technology improves. Investigators working these cases know that the tool they need to crack the case might not exist yet. So they hold on to everything. They keep the chain of custody intact. They wait. In the years following the initial discovery of Asha's buried belongings, the FBI's laboratory and other forensic facilities made repeated attempts to extract useful biological evidence from the materials. Touch DNA, the trace amount of genetic material left by skin cells when a person handles an object, was a growing area of forensic science. Advances in amplification techniques made it possible to work with smaller and smaller quantities of DNA, and to generate profiles from samples that would previously have been considered too degraded or too small to be useful. By the early 2020s, the combination of improved touch DNA analysis and the power of genetic genealogy databases had created conditions under which evidence that had resisted analysis for years could suddenly yield results. Cases across the country began to break open. The Golden State Killer. The murder of Lacey Peterson's unborn son was approached differently. Dozens of cases that had sat in the cold case files for decades began to produce suspects. The specific forensic methodology applied to the Asha Degree case in 2024 has not been fully disclosed. But the result, key suspects identified, suggests that DNA or other trace biological evidence from the scene was successfully profiled and matched either directly to a known offender in a criminal database, or through the genetic genealogy process to someone whose relatives had submitted their DNA to a consumer genealogy service. Either way, the identification of suspects represents the crossing of a threshold that investigators and the Degree family have been working toward for more than 2 decades. The name or names of those suspects, once fully confirmed and legal processes are in place, will presumably be disclosed to the public. What happens next, whether charges are filed, whether a prosecution occurs, whether the truth about Asha's fate is formally established in a courtroom, remains to be seen. The legal process is slow. Evidence that identifies a suspect is not the same as evidence sufficient to convict in a court of law. The gap between knowing and proving is one that the criminal justice system takes seriously, as it should. But for the first time in 24 years, there is a clear direction. There is a name, or names, at the end of the investigative thread. And the people responsible for whatever happened to Asha Degree on Valentine's Day 2000 are no longer invisible. I want to take a moment to talk about the broader context of child abduction and missing children cases in America, because understanding that context helps understand why the Asha Degree case has remained so significant for so long. Every year in the United States, hundreds of thousands of children are reported missing. The vast majority of those reports are resolved quickly: the child ran away and was found, or there was a miscommunication, or a custodial dispute was at the root of the disappearance. The cases that are not resolved quickly, the cases where a child genuinely disappears into an unknown fate, are far smaller in number. But they are the cases that carry the most weight, that generate the most fear, that remind us of the most fundamental vulnerability in the relationship between adults and children. The fear that drives that weight is primal. Every parent knows it. Every person who has ever cared for a child knows it. The world contains people who want to harm children. Most of the time, the systems we have built, the parenting, the community, the social structures, keep children safe from those people. But sometimes, despite everything, a child slips through. A child ends up alone on a dark road at night. And then the worst happens. What distinguishes the Asha Degree case from many other missing children cases is a combination of factors that makes it uniquely haunting. The voluntariness, or apparent voluntariness, of her departure. The witnesses who saw her and did nothing. The buried evidence. The year after year of forensic near misses. The family that has maintained its dignity and its hope across a span of time that would break most people. And the simple, devastating image at the center of it all. A 9-year-old girl, in the rain, in the dark, walking along a highway. Where was she going? Why did she go? What happened when she got there? Those questions have echoed across 24 years, across countless investigations and re-investigations, across the changing landscape of American forensic science and the changing media landscape that has given voice to cases like this one. And now, at last, the echo is beginning to receive an answer. Let us spend some time on the suspects and the theories that have been discussed publicly over the years, because understanding who investigators have looked at, and why, helps understand the shape of this case. Over the course of 24 years, the investigation has generated a significant number of persons of interest. Some of these names have been discussed publicly by investigators or in media coverage of the case. Others have circulated in the online true crime community, where amateur investigators have spent years analyzing the available evidence and generating theories of their own. It is important, as we discuss these theories, to remember that the public record of this case is not complete. Investigators have access to information that has never been disclosed publicly. The identification of suspects in 2024 presumably represents the culmination of investigative work that has been ongoing and which the public has not been fully informed about. Anything discussed here must be understood in that context, as analysis of the publicly available record, not as definitive claims about any individual's guilt or innocence. With that said, let us look at the terrain. One of the enduring questions in this case is whether whoever was responsible for whatever happened to Asha was someone known to her. The logistics of getting a cautious, Strangerwary 9-year-old out of her house in the middle of the night and onto a specific stretch of highway strongly suggest the involvement of someone Asha knew and trusted. Alternatively, it suggests that someone had been in contact with her over a period of time, building enough of a relationship to override her natural caution. This leads investigators and analysts back to the same set of circles: family, school, church, neighborhood, extracurricular activities. Wherever Asha spent her time. Whoever had regular contact with her. Investigators spent years looking at various individuals connected to these spheres of Asha's life. Some of those individuals were cleared by alibi or by physical evidence. Others were not publicly cleared and remain in that uncomfortable category of unresolved interest. The shed itself is, as always, central to thinking about suspects. Whoever buried those items near the shed had specific knowledge of that location. They knew it was there. They knew it was accessible. They knew it was away from the most visible areas of scrutiny. That knowledge points toward someone with a connection to that area, someone who lived nearby, worked nearby, or had reason to frequent that stretch of Highway 18. There has also been discussion, over the years, of whether a vehicle was involved in Asha's final movements. The witness sightings place her on foot on the highway. But if someone was driving and stopped to pick her up, or if she got into a vehicle voluntarily, because it belonged to someone she knew, then the trail of physical evidence on the highway would end at the point where she got into that vehicle. The shed and its surroundings may then represent not the place where Asha ended up on her own, but the place to which she was driven. None of this is confirmed. All of it is inference from the available evidence. But it represents the kind of thinking that has driven this investigation, the kind of scenarios that investigators have modeled and tested against the available facts. What the forensic breakthrough of 2024 apparently did was cut through 2 decades of inference and theory and produce something concrete, a biological link between a specific person and the physical evidence from the scene. That is a different order of magnitude than a theory. That is a fact. And facts, in cases like this one, are the only things that ultimately matter. There is a community of people, and it is a large community, who have followed the Asha Degree case online for years. True crime forums, Reddit threads, Facebook groups, podcast episodes, YouTube videos. The collective investigative energy directed at this case by ordinary citizens who have become obsessed with understanding what happened to that little girl represents thousands of hours of analysis, research, and discussion. Some of what has emerged from this community activity is genuinely useful. Citizen investigators have dug up historical records, identified connections between individuals, surfaced information that had been overlooked or forgotten in the years since the initial investigation. The power of the internet to connect people with different pieces of knowledge and different analytical frameworks has produced some remarkably sophisticated analysis of this case. Some of what has emerged is less useful: speculation that hardened into conviction, theories that became treated as facts, individuals who were named as suspects without evidence and whose lives were disrupted by that naming. The dark side of citizen investigation is real and it is harmful, and it is worth naming even as we acknowledge the genuine contributions that community interest has made to keeping this case alive. The key distinction is between analysis and accusation. Analyzing the available evidence, developing theories, asking questions, this is legitimate and valuable. Naming individuals as killers on the basis of speculation is something else entirely, and it is something that responsible true crime content creators actively work to avoid. Here at Cold Case Crime Lab, we take that responsibility seriously. We are here to examine the evidence, to ask the hard questions, to keep the story alive and in the public eye in ways that serve the pursuit of justice. We are not here to try cases on the internet or to harm individuals who have not been convicted of anything. With that said, the identification of suspects by law enforcement in 2024 is different in kind from anything the online community has produced. Law enforcement has access to the evidence. They have the resources to properly analyze it. They have the legal authority to pursue charges. When they say suspects have been identified, that means something qualitatively different from anything that has circulated in online discussions. Let us return to the Degree family and think about what 2024 has meant for them. Harold and Aquila Degree have been, throughout this ordeal, models of a particular kind of grace under extraordinary pressure. They have engaged with the media carefully and thoughtfully, sharing enough to keep their daughter's story in the public eye without descending into the kind of raw, televised grief that sensationalizes tragedy. They have spoken about their faith, about their hope, about their determination to find the truth. In the years when the case seemed stalled, when the headlines had moved on and the public's attention had drifted elsewhere, the Degrees continued to speak up. They gave interviews on anniversaries of Asha's disappearance. They cooperated with investigators' requests for new information. They participated in public awareness campaigns for missing children. They have, in every sense of the word, kept the faith. What does it mean, after 24 years, to be told that suspects have been identified? The Degree family has not spoken publicly about this in detail, which is understandable. These are the most delicate and potentially devastating moments of a journey that has already been almost unbearable. Any public statement they make is calculated in ways that protect both the legal process and their own emotional survival. But we can imagine, we can try, imperfectly, to imagine, what it might feel like. The complicated mixture of relief and dread. The reopening of wounds that have never fully closed. The anticipation of learning, finally, the truth about what happened to their daughter. And underneath all of it, the grief. The grief that has never gone away and that will never entirely go away, regardless of what the truth turns out to be. Because the truth cannot bring Asha back. It cannot restore the 24 years. It cannot give them the daughter they lost. What it can give them is closure in the only sense that matters for families like theirs, the knowledge. The knowing. The end of the terrible, endless question mark. That is what is potentially within reach now. And no one who has any empathy for what this family has endured can help but feel the weight of that. Let us talk about what the Asha Degree case tells us about the broader system of child protection in America and about what needs to change. One of the most troubling aspects of this case, an aspect that has been discussed but perhaps not enough, is the role of the witnesses on Highway 18. The people who saw a 9-year-old girl walking alone on a rural highway in the rain at 3 a.m. and did not call the police. This failure is not simply a matter of individual neglect. It reflects something about the way communities relate to children, about the diffusion of responsibility, about the assumptions people make when they encounter something unexpected. The social psychologist would call it the bystander effect, the well-documented phenomenon in which the presence of multiple potential responders actually reduces the likelihood that any one of them will act, because each person assumes that someone else will handle it. But it also reflects something specific about the cultural context of Shelby, North Carolina in the year 2000. About what people saw when they saw Asha. About what assumptions they made. About whether, in a different context or in relation to a different child, they would have acted differently. These are uncomfortable reflections. They are necessary ones. The case also raises questions about what resources were available to the Degree family in the immediate aftermath of Asha's disappearance. How quickly was the investigation scaled up? How much investigative bandwidth was devoted to this case in its critical early hours, when evidence is freshest and memories are clearest? How well was the Degree family supported through the initial process of working with law enforcement? Advocacy organizations for missing and murdered children of color have documented significant disparities in how cases are handled based on the race and socioeconomic background of the victim. These disparities exist at every level of the system, from initial law enforcement response to media coverage to prosecutorial resources. Whether and to what extent those disparities affected the handling of Asha's case is something we cannot fully know from the outside. But the question deserves to be asked. As we move toward the present, let us think about what the resolution of this case, when it comes, will mean not just for the Degree family, but for the broader landscape of cold case investigation. The Asha Degree case has been one of the most high-profile unsolved child disappearance cases in the southeastern United States for 2 decades. Its resolution, when it comes, will be a significant moment, a marker of how far forensic science has come, of what sustained investigative effort can accomplish, and of what it means to refuse to give up on a case simply because it is old or difficult. It will also, presumably, tell us something concrete about what happened on the night of February the 13th into the 14th of 2000. About where Asha was going, and why. About who was responsible for whatever happened to her. About whether she suffered, and for how long, and what was done to her. These are not easy things to contemplate. But they are the things that matter. They are the facts that the Degree family has been waiting for. They are the truths that Asha Degree, in whatever way truth matters to a child who has been gone for 24 years, deserves to have told. I want to say something here about the nature of justice in cases like this one. Justice is not a simple thing. It is not just the conviction of a perpetrator, though that matters enormously. It is not just the public acknowledgement of what happened, though that matters too. Justice, in cases involving the disappearance or murder of a child, is something more complex and more elusive. It involves the full accounting of what happened. It involves the recognition of the humanity and the life of the victim. It involves some form of reckoning, legal, social, moral, for the person or people responsible. It also involves change. The kind of systemic change that makes it less likely that another child will be failed in the same ways. Less likely that witnesses will see something and do nothing. Less likely that evidence will sit unanalyzed for years because the technology does not yet exist to process it. Less likely that a family will spend 24 years in the darkness of not knowing. That kind of justice is still in process in the Asha Degree case. And it will continue to be in process long after the immediate legal proceedings, whatever form they take, have concluded. I want to spend some time on the question of what Asha's life might have been. She was born on the 5th of August, 1990. If she were alive today, she would be 34 years old. Old enough to have a career, a family of her own, children perhaps. Old enough to have lived through the September 11th attacks as an 11-year-old, to have grown up with the Internet revolution, to have navigated the financial crisis of 2008 as a teenager, to have come of age in the social upheaval of the 2010s and 2020s. What would Asha Degree have been? Where would she have gone to college, if she had gone? What career would she have chosen? What would have made her laugh, as an adult, the way she made the people around her laugh as a child? We do not know. We will never know. That is the real theft at the center of this case, not just the life Asha was living when she disappeared, but the entire unwritten future that was stolen along with her. She would be 34 years old today. Her parents are older now. Her brother is older. The community that knew her has changed, as all communities change over a quarter of a century. But Asha Degree, in the memory of the people who loved her and in the ongoing effort to find the truth about her fate, remains 9 years old. Remains the bright-eyed, funny, cautious little girl who packed her bag in the middle of the night and walked out into the Valentine's Day rain. She has not aged in the minds of the people who love her. She cannot. That is both the tragedy and the power of cases like this one. The person is gone, but the image of them remains, vivid, specific, irreplaceable. The memory of who they were animates the search for what happened to them, drives the decades of investigation, sustains the family through the years of waiting. Asha Degree has not been forgotten. She will not be forgotten. Not while her family lives. Not while investigators work her case. Not while people like you watch videos like this one and carry her story forward. Let us return, one more time, to the night itself. To February the 13th into the 14th of 2000. To the rain, and the darkness, and the highway, and the small figure walking south. What was she thinking? This is the question that ultimately has no answer, and that no forensic breakthrough can fully address. We may learn, eventually, who did what to Asha Degree. We may learn where she went and what happened when she got there. We may learn whose DNA was on her belongings, who buried them, who has been living with the knowledge of what happened to that little girl for 24 years. But we will never fully know what was in Asha's mind as she walked. What she hoped for. What she feared. What she believed was waiting for her at the end of that road. Was she excited? Was she frightened? Was she acting on a plan that seemed clear and logical to her 9-year-old mind, even if it looks incomprehensible from the outside? Did she realize, at some point on that walk, that she had made a terrible mistake? Did she try to turn back? We do not know. We cannot know. What we know is that she was brave, in the specific way that children can be brave when they have decided on a course of action, moving forward in the dark and the rain, keeping to the shoulder of the highway, pressing on toward whatever destination she had in mind. Her bravery was almost certainly misplaced, directed toward something or someone who did not deserve it. But it was bravery nonetheless. She deserved better than what she got. Whatever happened at the end of that walk, whatever truth the forensic evidence of 2024 has unlocked, the certainty that she deserved better is absolute and final and needs no further investigation. As we approach the end of this story, not the end of the case, which is still unfolding, but the end of what we can currently say with confidence about what happened and why, I want to take a step back and look at the whole of it. 24 years. A family shattered and sustained simultaneously. A community haunted by the image of a child it failed to protect. A highway that has been driven 1,000 times by people who cannot drive it without thinking of a little girl in the rain. A shed that became, through the slow accumulation of evidence, one of the most significant locations in the history of North Carolina cold case investigation. And now, suspects identified. The wheels of justice turning, slowly but finally moving in a direction that leads somewhere. This is what it looks like when a cold case refuses to die. Not a dramatic breakthrough in the first year, not a confession, not a witness who comes forward with the whole truth. It looks like 2 decades of sustained effort. Of keeping evidence preserved. Of developing technology. Of training investigators. Of maintaining the chain of custody and the commitment to a case that, to the world at large, has long since faded from the headlines. It looks like a family that never stopped speaking their daughter's name. It looks like a community that never entirely let go of the question. It looks like you, watching this video, learning this story, carrying it forward. There are things about this case that we still do not know. There are questions that the resolution of the legal process, whenever it comes, may not fully answer. Let me name some of them, because naming them is part of honoring the complexity of this case and the humanity of the people at its center. We do not know, and may never definitively know, exactly what motivated Asha to leave that night. Even if the person responsible for her fate is identified and prosecuted, even if a full account of what happened to her emerges through legal proceedings, the question of what was in her mind remains. Did she go willingly to meet someone? Was she deceived? Was she frightened into leaving? Was there something in her immediate circumstances, something we have never been told about, that made leaving seem, to her, like the right choice? We do not know what happened to her body. As of the time of this recording, Asha Degree has never been found. Her remains have not been located. This is one of the most painful aspects of the case for her family and for investigators alike. Without remains, there are limits to what forensic science can establish about the manner and circumstances of her death. Without remains, there is no final resting place for a little girl whose family has been in mourning for 24 years. We do not know the full scope of what happened in the period between Asha's departure from her home and whatever ultimately happened to her. There is a gap in the timeline, a period in those early morning hours of Valentine's Day 2000, that has never been fully reconstructed. What happened in that gap is the heart of the mystery and, presumably, the heart of whatever case law enforcement is building. We do not know whether there was more than one person involved. Cold cases frequently reveal, upon resolution, that more people had knowledge of a crime than had been suspected. Whether the suspect or suspects identified in 2024 acted alone, or whether there were others who knew, who helped, who stayed silent across 24 years, this is unknown. What we do know, what is certain, is that someone knows the truth. Someone has been carrying it for 24 years. Someone went back to that shed on Highway 18 and buried a child's belongings in a trash bag in the ground and walked away. Someone has woken up, every morning since February the 14th of 2000, with the knowledge of what happened to Asha Degree. That time, it appears, is ending. Before I close, I want to acknowledge something about the true crime genre itself, about this kind of content and what it means to create it responsibly. Cases like Asha Degrees have become part of what is sometimes called the true crime boom, the massive expansion of podcasts, YouTube channels, television series, and other content focused on violent crime, missing persons, and the investigation of wrongdoing. This genre has grown enormously in the past decade and continues to grow. It reaches audiences of millions. The best of this content does genuinely valuable work. It keeps cases alive. It reaches audiences who might have tip-relevant information. It educates the public about how the criminal justice system works, about forensic science, about the ways communities can fail vulnerable people. It humanizes victims who might otherwise be reduced to statistics. The worst of this content treats real tragedies as entertainment, reduces victims to characters, and prioritizes drama and engagement over accuracy and compassion. It names suspects without evidence, theories as facts, and speculation as investigation. Here at Cold Case Crime Lab, we try to occupy the former space and stay well clear of the latter. We try to tell these stories in a way that honors the humanity of the people at the center of them. We try to be accurate. We try to be careful about what we claim and what we speculate. We try to keep the focus on the truth and on the families who are still waiting for it. Whether we always succeed is a judgment that you, the audience, are in the best position to make. But the commitment is real. And in a case like Asha Degrees, where a family is still living, still waiting, still hoping, that commitment is not just a creative principle. It is a moral one. Asha Degree would be 34 years old. She packed a bag in the middle of the night. She walked out into the Valentine's Day rain. She was seen by multiple people on Highway 18 in the early hours of February 14, 2000. Her belongings were found buried near a shed, less than 2 miles from her home, almost exactly 1 year after she disappeared. She was never found. For 24 years, her family has waited. Her community has waited. Investigators have worked and waited. And then, in 2024, the forensic science that did not exist when Asha walked out of her house finally reached back across a quarter of a century and found something. Found someone. The wheels of justice are turning. The truth, or the closest thing to it that the law can construct, is finally within reach. For Harold and Aquila Degree, who have never stopped speaking their daughter's name, we see you. We honor your resilience, your grace, your extraordinary love for a little girl the world has not forgotten. For Asha, we remember you. We will keep saying your name. We will keep asking the questions. We will not look away. And for whoever buried those items near that shed on Highway 18, who has been living with this truth for 24 years, your time is running out. The case of Asha Degree is not over. But for the first time in a very long time, it is moving toward an end. This is Cold Case Crime Lab. And we do not let cold cases stay cold. Now, before you go anywhere, I need you to do something. This is a story that deserves to travel. Asha Degree deserves the widest possible audience. And the Degree family deserves to know that people all over the world are paying attention, are demanding answers, are refusing to let this case be forgotten. So here is what I need from you right now. If this story moved you, and I believe it did, if you have made it this far, please hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so that every new case we release comes directly to you. And leave a comment. Not just any comment. Tell me what you think happened that night. Tell me what you believe about the 2024 breakthrough. Tell me what question about this case keeps you awake. Because the conversation around cases like this one is part of how they get solved. Your comment might reach someone who has a piece of information. Your share might land in front of someone who knows something. The visibility you help create by engaging with this content is not separate from the pursuit of justice, it is part of it. Subscribe. Comment. Share this with someone who needs to know Asha's story. Because as long as we are talking about Asha Degree, this case is still open. Justice for Asha. Cold Case Crime Lab, every case deserves a second look. Extended Deep Dive, the full investigation. There is a particular kind of grief that does not get talked about enough in the way we discuss missing persons cases. It is not the grief of confirmed loss, the grief of a funeral, of a grave to visit, of a death certificate, of a moment in time that the world around you acknowledges and makes space for. It is the grief of the in-between. The grief of not knowing. Psychologists who work with families of missing persons have a term for it. Ambiguous loss. The concept was developed by family therapist Pauline Boss, and it describes the experience of losing someone without the kind of closure, however imperfect that word is, that ordinarily accompanies death. The person is gone but not confirmed dead. Present in memory and in love and in daily thought, but absent from physical life. The grief is real, but the rituals and social frameworks we have built around grief do not quite apply, because the loss is not confirmed. The person might still come home. The door, however improbably, has not fully closed. This is the world Harold and Asha Degree have been living in since the morning of February the 14th, 2000. Not the clean, terrible world of confirmed loss, but the murky, endless world of not knowing. 24 years of that. 24 years of a grief that cannot fully discharge because the facts that would allow it to discharge have not been established. The psychological literature on ambiguous loss describes it as among the most difficult forms of grief human beings can experience. Because it is grief without a script. There is no funeral to plan, no eulogy to write, no grave to tend. The social rituals that help communities support bereaved families do not apply in the same way. Friends and neighbors, after a certain point, move on, not because they do not care, but because life moves on and the visible markers of loss fade. But the family does not move on. Cannot move on. They are stuck at the edge of that unanswered question. For 24 years, Harold and Asha Degree have gotten up every morning and walked back to the edge of that question. Every day, the same absence. Every day, the same not knowing. The announcement of suspects identified in 2024 does not end the ambiguous loss. It may intensify it, in some ways, in the short term. Because the truth, when it comes, will be specific and terrible. It will transform 24 years of not knowing into a specific knowing, a particular horror that will have to be incorporated into the lived experience of this family going forward. But it will also, at last, be true. It will be something real and fixed rather than something shifting and uncertain. And that, for families in this situation, is often experienced as a form of relief even in the midst of devastating pain. We need to talk more specifically about the investigative history of this case, about the specific agencies involved, the specific timelines of key developments, and the specific challenges that made this case so difficult to solve for so long. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Department was the primary law enforcement agency in the initial response to Asha's disappearance. Cleveland County in 2000 had limited investigative resources compared to larger jurisdictions. A case of this magnitude, a missing child with no immediate explanation, no clear evidence of what happened, quickly exceeded what a county sheriff's department could handle alone. The FBI's involvement began early, which reflects both the seriousness of the disappearance and the standard practice of federal involvement in cases of potential child abduction. The FBI's resources, laboratory capabilities, investigative personnel, access to national databases, were significant additions to what the local department could bring to bear. The combination of local knowledge and federal resources that characterizes the best collaborative investigations was present in the Asha Degree case from relatively early on. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation also played a role. The NCSBI provides investigative support to local law enforcement across the state and has expertise in violent crimes and missing persons investigations that complements both local and federal efforts. One of the ongoing challenges in investigations that span multiple agencies and multiple years is coordination. Evidence collected in 2000 needs to be passed, intact and with proper documentation, to investigators working the case in 2001, in 2009, in 2024. Chain of custody, the documented, unbroken record of who had physical possession of evidence and when, is essential to any eventual prosecution. A break in the chain of custody can render evidence inadmissible in court, regardless of how scientifically significant it might be. Maintaining the integrity of evidence across 24 years, across multiple agencies, through personnel changes and institutional memory gaps, is a genuine challenge. It requires specific protocols and specific commitments. The fact that the forensic evidence from the Asha Degree case was still usable in 2024, still of sufficient quality and with sufficient chain of custody documentation to support the identification of suspects, speaks to the care with which it was handled over more than 2 decades. This is not something to take for granted. There are cases in which evidence has been lost, degraded, or improperly handled in ways that permanently compromise the ability to solve them. The Asha Degree case, whatever its other frustrations, has apparently been handled with sufficient care that the passage of time did not destroy the critical physical evidence. Let us now go into significant detail about the specific forensic evidence and what it may mean for the resolution of this case. The items recovered from near the shed in 2001 were processed at the time with the forensic technology available then. This would have included standard DNA analysis, fingerprint analysis, trace evidence analysis including fiber analysis, and whatever other methodologies were appropriate to the specific materials recovered. In 2001, standard DNA analysis required a relatively large sample, typically a blood sample, a saliva swab, or a tissue sample of meaningful size. Touch DNA, which involves the analysis of the trace amounts of skin cells left on surfaces when people handle objects, was in development but not yet widely applied in criminal investigations. The ability to generate a DNA profile from a surface that has simply been touched was, in 2001, limited. By the mid-2000s, touch DNA had become more reliable and more commonly used. By the 2010s, advances in amplification technology, specifically the development of increasingly sensitive polymerase chain reaction techniques, had dramatically lowered the threshold of genetic material required to generate a usable DNA profile. This meant that evidence collected in 2000 and 2001 could, in some cases, be reanalyzed in the 2010s with techniques that would generate profiles where previous analyses had found nothing. This is exactly the kind of development that has driven the reopening and eventual resolution of cold cases across the country. The other major forensic development relevant to this case is genetic genealogy. As we touched on earlier, genetic genealogy involves taking a DNA profile generated from crime scene evidence and searching it against the databases of consumer genealogy services, platforms where millions of ordinary people have submitted their own DNA for ancestry analysis. The matches that come back are not necessarily the perpetrator themselves, but relatives, cousins, half-siblings, distant relatives who share enough genetic material with the perpetrator to allow investigators to build a family tree. Building a family tree from partial DNA matches is painstaking work. It requires collaboration between forensic genealogists and law enforcement investigators. It requires cross-referencing genetic data with historical records, census records, birth records, marriage records, death records, to map out family relationships and narrow down the pool of potential suspects. The process can take months or even years. But when it works, it produces results with remarkable precision, identifying a specific individual whose DNA matches the crime scene evidence through a combination of genetic and genealogical analysis that is extremely difficult to challenge in court. This technique has been used to identify perpetrators in cases going back decades, cases where the only evidence was biological material left at a scene, where traditional database searches had found nothing, where the perpetrator had never been in a criminal DNA database. The Golden State Killer, identified in 2018 after more than 4 decades, was the highest profile early application of this technique. But hundreds of other cases, many of them less famous but equally important to the families affected, have been resolved through genetic genealogy in the years since. Whether this is the specific technique that produced the breakthrough in the Asha Degree case in 2024 has not been definitively confirmed. But it is consistent with the timeline of forensic development, with the nature of the evidence in the case, and with the way similar cold case breakthroughs have occurred across the country. Let us talk about the community of Shelby, North Carolina, and what 24 years of this case has meant for the people who live there. Every community that has a high-profile unsolved crime at its center is changed by that crime in ways that accumulate over time. The unsolved murder, the missing child, the unexplained disappearance, these are wounds that do not close. They shape the community's sense of itself, its sense of safety, its relationship with its own past. In Shelby, the disappearance of Asha Degree has been a presence for more than 2 decades. For residents who were adults when it happened, it is a specific memory: the morning the news broke, the search, the flyers, the years of not knowing. For residents who were children when it happened, it is part of the texture of growing up in Shelby, a story they heard from their parents, a case they learned about in school, a name that has been part of the community's vocabulary for as long as they can remember. For young people in Shelby who were born after 2000, who have never known a version of their community that did not have Asha's disappearance as part of its history, it is simply part of what Shelby is. A sad, unresolved chapter in the story of the place they are from. The community's response to Asha's disappearance over the years has been largely characterized by solidarity with the Degree family. Shelby has not been a community that turned its back on this case or on this family. People have shown up, at anniversary events, at fundraisers, at community prayer vigils. The sustained attention of Shelby residents to the fate of one of their own reflects something admirable about the character of the place. At the same time, the reality that whoever was responsible for whatever happened to Asha Degree was almost certainly someone connected to the Shelby community, someone who knew the area, who may have known Asha herself, has been a persistent and uncomfortable undercurrent. The possibility that the person who harmed Asha has been living in or near Shelby for 24 years, attending the same churches, shopping at the same stores, perhaps even participating in some of the community events organized in Asha's memory, this is the kind of thought that communities in this situation try not to dwell on but cannot entirely avoid. The identification of suspects in 2024, and whatever legal proceedings follow, will bring this undercurrent to the surface. The community will have to reckon with the truth about who is responsible and what that means for the community's understanding of itself. That reckoning is not comfortable. But it is necessary. It is part of what justice looks like in practice. I want to spend time now on something that has been insufficiently addressed in most public discussions of this case, and that is the question of Asha's emotional and psychological state in the period leading up to her disappearance. We know, from the account of her teacher and from the broader picture that has emerged over the years, that Asha seemed somewhat different in the week before she disappeared. Quieter. More withdrawn. Less engaged with the normal activities of her school day. Her teacher noticed. Others may have noticed as well. What does this tell us? There are several possible interpretations. One interpretation is that Asha was anticipating the night she disappeared. That she was aware, in the days before the 14th of February, that she was going to do something. That she had a plan, or at least the outline of a plan, and that the weight of it was showing in her behavior. Children who are planning to run away, or who have been told to be somewhere at a specific time, often show behavioral changes in the days before the event. The anticipation of a significant, frightening, or exciting action creates a kind of internal tension that can manifest as withdrawal, distraction, or subdued behavior. Another interpretation is that something had happened to Asha in the week before she disappeared that was causing her distress. Not a plan she had made, but something that had been done to her or said to her. A threat. An ultimatum. Instructions given by someone who had power over her in some way that we do not fully understand. If someone had been grooming Asha, building a relationship with her over time and then directing her to come to a specific place at a specific time, the instructions for that meeting might have been given in the week before Valentine's Day. And the weight of holding those instructions, of knowing what she was supposed to do and being unable to talk about it, would manifest exactly as her teacher described. A third interpretation, less supported by the known facts but worth considering, is that the behavioral change was entirely unrelated to the events of the night she disappeared. Children go through phases. 9-year-olds have bad weeks that do not necessarily connect to anything dramatic. The quietness in the week before might simply have been a bad week, a conflict with a friend, a worry about school, a minor upset that had nothing to do with the reason she left. Investigators have considered all of these possibilities. The truth, as best as can be reconstructed from the available evidence, probably incorporates elements of more than one. But the behavioral change in that final week remains one of the most suggestive pieces of contextual evidence in the case, a signal that something was happening in Asha's inner life that the people around her were not fully aware of. Let us talk about one of the most important and underexplored aspects of this case, and that is the specific items Asha chose to pack in her bag. A pencil case. Hair accessories. A marker. A book bag. These are the items that were found buried near the shed in 2001. They are consistent with the contents of a school bag, the kind of bag a 9-year-old might pack for a day at school. But Asha was not going to school. She was leaving in the middle of the night. So why pack school supplies? One theory is that she did not actually pack the items in her bag that night, that the items found buried were not the sum total of what she took with her, but rather items that were discarded from a bag that was taken apart and partially buried. In other words, someone else selected which items to bury and which to keep or dispose of elsewhere. The pencil case and hair accessories were perhaps considered innocuous, items that would not lead directly to anyone. Other items, more incriminating, were disposed of in ways we have never discovered. Another theory is that Asha genuinely packed school supplies because she was packing in a hurry, in the dark, drawing on what she knew the bag contained. She may not have been selecting items deliberately so much as simply taking what was already there. A third theory connects to the idea that she was meeting someone who had framed the meeting in terms of something normal and school-adjacent. If whoever contacted her had told her to bring her book bag, to make it look like she was just going to school early, to have a cover story if someone saw her, then the school supplies in the bag would make sense as a kind of accidental normalizing camouflage. None of these theories is fully satisfying. Each leaves something unexplained. But the specificity of the items found, their deliberateness as a selection of objects from a child's daily life, makes them worth thinking about carefully. The role of the media in this case is worth a detailed examination. In the year 2000, the media landscape was fundamentally different from what it is today. The Internet existed, but its role in spreading information about missing persons cases was limited compared to what it would become. Cable news was dominant, but it operated on a news cycle that was shorter and more competitive than even the pace of news today. Print newspapers still had significant reach and readership. In this media environment, the cases that received sustained national attention were largely the cases that fit certain narrative templates: attractive, white, middle-class or upper-class victims in cases with photogenic settings and emotionally resonant backstories. The phenomenon that journalists and media critics would later describe as missing white woman syndrome was already operative in 2000, shaping which cases received network news coverage, which families were invited onto morning talk shows, which missing persons became national stories. Asha Degree received significant local coverage and some national attention, particularly in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance and at key moments in the subsequent investigation. The FBI's involvement helped maintain visibility. The discovery of her buried belongings in 2001 generated a fresh wave of coverage. But the sustained, saturation-level national attention that has historically been reserved for cases involving white victims was not present in the Asha Degree case. Her case has been more consistently covered by local North Carolina media and by true crime media, podcasts, YouTube channels, online forums, than by mainstream national media outlets. The rise of true crime media in the past decade has been significant for cases like Asha's. Podcasts like Your Own Backyard, dedicated to the disappearance of Kristen Smart, and Crime Junkie, which covers a wide range of cases, have demonstrated that true crime audiences are vast, passionate, and highly engaged. They consume information, they share it, they discuss it in online communities that stretch across the country and around the world. When a case like Asha Degree's is covered by true crime media, it reaches audiences that traditional journalism has not consistently served. The YouTube true crime community, of which Cold Case Crime Lab is a part, has become one of the most significant platforms for keeping these cases alive and visible. The combination of visual storytelling, the ability to go deep on a single case over an extended period, and the direct engagement with audiences through comments and community features has created a form of sustained, interactive attention to cold cases that did not exist 20 years ago. This matters in practical terms. Cases with active online communities generate more tips. They generate more pressure on law enforcement to continue investing investigative resources. They generate the kind of public awareness that can cause someone with relevant information to finally come forward, because the person with information now knows that the story is still being told, that people still care, that their silence is not lost in a general social forgetting. Has the true crime community's attention to the Asha Degree case contributed to the 2024 breakthrough? It is impossible to say definitively. But the sustained visibility that online true crime content has provided to this case over the past decade is not nothing. It is part of the ecosystem that has kept this investigation alive. Let me now address some of the specific theories that have circulated about this case and evaluate them as fairly and as carefully as the available evidence allows. The first major theory is what might be called the targeted abduction theory, the idea that a specific individual had identified Asha as a target, had been building a relationship with her over time, and had arranged to meet her on the night of February the 13th into February the 14th of 2000. This theory is consistent with the evidence in several important ways. It explains the apparent premeditation of Asha's departure. It explains why she packed a bag. It explains why she was walking in a specific direction on a specific road in the middle of the night. It explains why she ran from one vehicle that approached her but presumably got into or went toward another. And it is consistent with the behavioral changes observed in her in the week before she disappeared, the quietness, the withdrawal, the weight of something she was keeping to herself. The targeted abduction theory also aligns with what we know statistically about crimes against children. The vast majority of child abductions that do not involve family members involve someone known to the child, a neighbor, a family acquaintance, a person in the community who has had regular contact with the child and has used that contact to groom them. The image of the stranger who grabs a child in a public place is statistically atypical. The reality is almost always someone closer. The second major theory is the runaway theory, the idea that Asha left of her own volition to escape something in her immediate environment, with no prearranged meeting with anyone. Under this theory, she walked out because something at home, or something anticipated at school, or something in her near future, felt unbearable or frightening enough that leaving in the middle of the night seemed like the better option. This theory has significant problems. As we have discussed, every indication is that the Degree home was a loving, stable environment. There is no evidence of abuse or serious conflict. The idea that a 9-year-old would pack a bag and walk 2 miles alone on a dark highway in the rain to escape a typical household without a specific destination in mind stretches credulity. Where would she be going? To whom? And why would she run from a driver who stopped, if she was simply a lost child looking for help? The third theory involves an opportunistic encounter, the idea that Asha left for reasons unconnected to anyone specific, and that in the course of her walk along Highway 18, she encountered someone who was not expecting her, and that whatever happened next was not premeditated by anyone but happened as a result of that chance encounter. This theory is not impossible, but it has significant problems as well. The deliberate burial of Asha's belongings near the shed suggests not a panicked reaction to a chance encounter, but a calculated decision to hide evidence made by someone who had time to think. You do not wrap items in a trash bag and bury them in the ground in a moment of spontaneous panic. That is premeditated behavior. It is the behavior of someone who understood the significance of what had happened and acted deliberately to conceal it. The most coherent reading of the available evidence points toward the first theory, the targeted abduction, as the most likely explanation for what happened to Asha Degree. Someone with specific knowledge of her life, her routine, and her whereabouts was involved. The question is who? Let us spend time on the geography of Cleveland County and why it matters. Cleveland County in western North Carolina is, as we have mentioned, rural and relatively sparsely populated. The area around Shelby in 2000 was, if anything, even less developed than it is today. The land along Highway 18, beyond the residential neighborhoods close to the city, is characterized by fields, patches of woods, occasional farm properties, and the kind of old outbuildings, barns, sheds, storage structures, that accumulate on rural southern land over generations. This geography matters for understanding how someone could bury evidence in 2001 without being observed. The shed near which Asha's belongings were buried was not in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. It was in an area with relatively low foot traffic and relatively limited visibility from the road. Someone who knew the area could have gone there at night, or even during the day, and done what needed to be done with limited risk of being seen. It also matters for understanding Asha's walk. The route from the Degree home on Oaks Road to the stretch of Highway 18 where the shed was located would have taken her through the edge of the residential area and then into more open, darker territory. For a 9-year-old who was afraid of the dark, this would have been a frightening walk under any circumstances. The fact that she made it, that she continued despite the darkness and the rain and whatever fear she must have felt, speaks again to the idea that she had a powerful motivation driving her forward. A meeting she had committed to. A destination she was determined to reach. The distance itself, something less than 2 miles, is not enormous for an adult. For a 9-year-old child walking in the rain on a rural highway in the middle of the night, it is a significant undertaking. It is long enough to have second thoughts. Long enough to turn back. Long enough for fear to overtake determination. Asha did not turn back. Whatever was waiting for her at the end of that walk was more compelling than the fear of the dark, the rain, the isolation, the risk of being seen. Now I want to address a question that does not get asked often enough in discussions of this case, and that is, what do we know about the timeline of the evening of February the 13th, and are there any gaps or inconsistencies that deserve more attention? The family's account of the evening has been consistent over the years. Church in the morning, sports on television in the evening, the children going to bed at a reasonable hour. Harold and Aquila going to their room. The house settling into the quiet of a Sunday night. At some point after the household settled, Asha got up, dressed, packed, and left. The witness sightings on Highway 18 begin at some point after midnight and before 3:30 in the morning. This gives a window of several hours between when the family went to sleep and when Asha was first spotted. What happened in that window? Was she lying awake in her bed, waiting for a specific time? Did she receive some kind of signal, a sound outside, perhaps, that was intended to indicate that whoever she was meeting was in position? Or did she simply get up when she felt confident that everyone else was asleep and start walking? The fact that she ran from one vehicle suggests she was not supposed to be seen. Whatever meeting she was heading toward was not public. She was not walking somewhere that she would have been comfortable explaining to a passing motorist. This is consistent with the idea that she had been told to come quietly, to come without being seen, to come alone. It is also worth considering whether there was any communication between Asha and whoever she was meeting in the period before the night itself. In 2000, without cell phones or internet, communication between a child and an adult would have had to occur through direct contact, in person, by telephone at the family home, or through notes or messages passed during an activity that brought them into contact. Investigators would have looked at the family telephone records from the weeks before Asha's disappearance. They would have looked for unusual calls, calls to numbers that did not connect to obvious family friends or relatives, calls at unusual hours. Whether anything significant was found in those records has not been publicly disclosed. The role of faith in this case is something I want to address with the seriousness it deserves. The Degree family is a family of deep faith. Their church was central to their family life. Their community, in the way of many black Southern communities, organized significantly around church, social connections, mutual support, the framework through which people understood their lives and their losses. In the immediate aftermath of Asha's disappearance, the church community rallied around the Degrees. Prayer vigils were held. The resources of the faith community, the networks, the volunteers, the emotional and spiritual support, were mobilized. This is what faith communities do in times of crisis, and it is genuinely valuable. The social capital of a close-knit church community is not nothing. It is real support for people facing an almost unbearable situation. But faith also intersects with this case in a potentially more complicated way. Churches, like all institutions that bring adults into sustained contact with children, can be environments in which predatory behavior occurs. The trust that members of a faith community place in the institution and in each other can create vulnerabilities that predatory individuals exploit. Investigators would have examined the church community to which the Degrees belonged as part of their exploration of who might have had sustained contact with Asha. This is standard investigative practice, and it is not an indictment of the institution or its members. It is simply an acknowledgement that wherever adults and children come into regular contact, the possibility of predatory behavior must be considered. Whether the investigation found anything significant in connection with the church community has not been publicly disclosed. But it is part of the broader investigative canvas that has been worked over 24 years. I want to take a long look at what the next steps in this case might be and what the resolution, when it comes, might look like. The identification of suspects, as reported in connection with the 2024 forensic breakthrough, is the beginning of a legal process rather than the end of an investigative one. Identifying a suspect and building a case sufficient to support criminal charges are different things. For prosecutors in Cleveland County, building a case in the Asha Degree matter presents specific challenges that are inherent to cold cases. Witnesses, if any exist with direct knowledge of what happened, are now 24 years older. Memories fade, distort, and in some cases, disappear entirely. Physical evidence from 2000 and 2001, however carefully preserved, has been subjected to the passage of time. On the other hand, cold cases also present certain advantages from a prosecutorial perspective. Suspects in cold cases have, by definition, been living with the weight of their crime for a long time. The psychological burden of that can produce behaviors, inconsistencies in stories told over the years, sudden confessions, incriminating statements made to people who later come forward, that provide additional evidence for prosecutors. Cold cases also benefit from the full development of the forensic science available at the time of prosecution, rather than being constrained by what was available at the time of the crime. The DNA evidence that identified suspects in 2024 is subject to 2024 forensic standards, which are far more rigorous and far more accepted in courtrooms than the standards of 2000. If charges are filed, the case will go through the standard process of the North Carolina criminal court system. Arraignment, pre-trial hearings, potentially a trial. The specific charges, which would likely include at minimum kidnapping and homicide, depending on what the evidence establishes, would carry significant potential penalties. Asha's body, if it has not been found, may need to be located to fully establish the facts of the case. The identification of suspects may produce information about what happened to her remains, either through cooperation by a suspect or through additional forensic investigation directed by information developed in the investigation. This is one of the most painful uncertainties in the case. For Harold and Aquila Degree, finding their daughter, finding a place to mourn her, finding whatever remains of her physical presence in the world, is part of what they have been waiting for. The law can prosecute a person for a crime even in the absence of a body, as has been demonstrated in numerous high-profile cases. But for the family, the absence of remains is a wound that a prosecution alone cannot entirely address. Let us return to something fundamental, the image of Asha walking. When we visualize the Asha Degree case, we always come back to that image. A small girl, in the dark, in the rain, walking along the edge of a highway. Alone. Moving forward. This image is, in some ways, the whole of the case. It contains the mystery, the tragedy, the determination, and the vulnerability all at once. A 9-year-old child should not be alone on a rural highway in the middle of the night. And yet there she was. And whatever combination of factors, her own decision, someone else's manipulation, her innocence, her trust, her courage, her fear, produced that image, that walk, that night. It is the image we have. It is the last image we have of Asha Degree alive. After the final sighting on Highway 18, after the last driver saw her and watched her disappear into the tree line, Asha passed out of the visual record. No confirmed sightings. No photographs. No video. Just the highway, the rain, the dark, and the absence where a little girl used to be. What happened after that, in the hours that followed, in the events that led to the burial of her belongings, in whatever final chapter of her life unfolded in that rural North Carolina darkness, we do not fully know. But we are closer to knowing than we have ever been. And when we know, we will face together the full weight of that knowledge. As a community of people who cared enough to learn this story, to spend this time with this case, to say Asha Degree's name out loud. We will face it together. There is one more dimension of this case that I want to address before we move toward the close, and that is the question of what it means for a community to sit with an unsolved crime for 24 years. Not just emotionally, though that dimension is real and significant. But socially, practically, in the day-to-day life of a community. When a crime is unsolved, especially a crime of this magnitude, the community that contains it is also the community that potentially contains the perpetrator. In Shelby, in the years since 2000, the person or people responsible for what happened to Asha Degree have presumably continued to live, at least for some portion of those years, in or near the area. They have been present at community events. They have interacted with friends and neighbors. They have, in all likelihood, been present for some of the public mourning and public remembrance that has occurred around Asha's case over the years. This is the horror at the center of many unsolved cases. Not just that the crime happened, but that the perpetrator remained free and present, embedded in the social fabric of the community, while the family and the community lived with the consequences of what they had done. It is the same horror that attended the Golden State Killer case, where it emerged that Joseph D'Angelo had lived an ordinary suburban life, had been a police officer, had had a family, for decades after committing the crimes that destroyed the lives of dozens of people. It is the same horror that attends every case in which an eventual conviction reveals that the perpetrator was someone known, someone trusted, someone who had been seen as a normal member of the community. If the 2024 identification in the Asha Degree case resolves in the same way, with a name that is, to some people in Shelby, a familiar and even trusted name, that horror will be part of the community's reckoning. The question of what was missed, what could have been seen, who might have known or suspected, will be present. These are not comfortable questions. But they are the right questions. Because the purpose of reckoning with the past is not to punish communities but to build better futures, futures in which children are safer, in which warning signs are recognized, in which the social trust that predators exploit is maintained with greater care and greater vigilance. As we truly approach the end of this story, I want to revisit one thing I said near the beginning, because I think it bears repeating. The fact that you have watched this far, that you have spent this time with this case, with this family, with this mystery, matters. It is not trivial. In a media landscape saturated with content competing for every available second of your attention, the choice to spend that attention on a case like this one, on a child like Asha Degree, is meaningful. It means that Asha's story is still being told. It means that somewhere out there, someone who has been holding information about this case for 24 years may hear it and, finally, find the courage to come forward. It means that the Degree family, who are presumably aware of the continued public interest in their daughter's case, knows that the world has not forgotten. This is what community looks like in the age of digital media. It is imperfect and it is sometimes messy and it does not always translate into justice. But it is real. And in cases like this one, it has made a difference. We are Cold Case Crime Lab. And we do not let cold cases stay cold. The rain is still falling on Highway 18 in Shelby, North Carolina, every time a storm rolls through Cleveland County. The same road. The same dark shoulder. The same trees pressing in on either side. The same night sky above. Asha Degree walked that road on a February night 24 years ago. She walked it with purpose and with courage and with whatever was driving her forward. She walked it alone. She deserved to walk it safely. She deserved to reach wherever she was going and to return home. She deserved to grow up, to laugh, to become the person she was going to be. She was 9 years old. She had a family who loved her. She had a community that knew her. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a heart that was full and a future that was wide open. And someone took all of that from her. Someone buried her belongings in the ground and walked away and let 24 years pass. And now, finally, the science has caught up with them. The walls are closing. The truth is coming. For Harold and Aquila Degree, we hold this moment gently. We know that whatever comes next will be both a relief and a new kind of grief. We know that the knowing, when it comes, will be hard. We know that there is no answer that brings their daughter back, no verdict that makes the 24 years unhappen, no justice that fully heals what has been broken. But we believe, as they apparently believe, in their extraordinary faith and their extraordinary endurance, that the truth matters. That knowing matters. That saying Asha's name, clearly and without flinching, is part of the work of honoring who she was and what was done to her. Asha Degree. Born the 5th of August, 1990. Disappeared the 14th of February, 2000. 9 years old. Beloved daughter, beloved sister, beloved member of the Shelby, North Carolina community. Not forgotten. Not abandoned. Still being sought. Still being named. And now, before you go anywhere at all, I need you to hear this final call to action and take it seriously. What you do in the next 60 seconds matters for cases like this one. If you have not subscribed to Cold Case Crime Lab, do it right now. Hit that subscribe button and then hit the notification bell. Because every week we come back to cases that deserve more than headlines and sound bites. We go deep. We go into the evidence, the families, the communities, the investigators, the forensic science, the human beings at the center of every story we tell. And you being subscribed means you are part of that work every single week. If this video moved you, and I believe it did, leave a comment right now. Tell me what you think about the 2024 breakthrough. Tell me what you believe happened on Valentine's night in 2000. Tell me what question about this case has been sitting in your mind since the beginning of this video. Your comments are not just engagement metrics. They are conversations. They are thoughts that travel, that reach people, that keep the story alive and in motion. If you know someone, a friend, a family member, someone in your life who cares about justice, about cold cases, about the stories of people who have been failed by the systems that were supposed to protect them, share this video with them right now. Not later. Right now. Because someone somewhere might watch this video and know something. Might remember something. Might finally be ready to say something they have been holding for 24 years. Cases get solved because people keep talking about them. Because people refuse to let them be forgotten. Because communities of people who care about justice keep asking questions and keeping stories alive until the truth, however long it takes, finally comes out. Asha Degree's truth is coming. Be part of bringing it home. Subscribe. Comment. Share. Justice for Asha. This is Cold Case Crime Lab, and every case deserves a second look. Final reflection, the meaning of 24 years. There is a reason that the Asha Degree case has never left the consciousness of the people who have learned about it. There is a reason that, 2.5 decades after a 9-year-old girl walked out of her home in the dark, people are still making videos about her, still writing about her, still searching for the truth about what happened to her. It is not simply morbid curiosity. It is not the same impulse that drives rubbernecking at an accident. It is something deeper, something more human, something that connects to the most fundamental questions we ask ourselves about the world and about each other. How does a child disappear? That question sounds almost naive when you put it plainly like that. We live in a world where children disappear, where violent crimes occur, where predatory people exist and sometimes go undetected for years. We know this intellectually. We have been told it, read about it, seen it in the news enough times that the abstraction of it is familiar to us. But Asha Degree was not an abstraction. She was a specific child, in a specific community, with a specific family, living a specific life. And the question of how she disappeared, how all of the systems that should have protected her failed on that particular night in that particular way, is a question that demands an answer not just for its own sake, but because the answer will tell us something about ourselves, about our communities, about the ways we do and do not look out for children. Every child who disappears and stays missing represents a failure, not necessarily of any one individual, not necessarily of any one institution, but of something. Of vigilance. Of attention. Of whatever combination of social and structural factors might have caught the problem before it became a tragedy. Understanding that failure, naming it, analyzing it, learning from it, is one of the most important things we can do in the aftermath of cases like this one. This is part of what true crime content, at its best, does. It is not just telling stories about bad things that happened. It is examining the conditions that allowed bad things to happen. It is asking, case by case, what could have been different, what should have been different, what needs to be different going forward. In the Asha Degree case, some of those questions have answers that are uncomfortable but clear. Witnesses on Highway 18 did not call the police when they saw a child alone on a rural road at 3 in the morning. This should not have happened. Regardless of the reasons it happened, regardless of the individual circumstances of each driver who saw her and did not act, the outcome was catastrophic. One phone call to law enforcement in those early morning hours might have changed everything. Might have brought Asha home. What would it take for those witnesses to have acted differently? Better public education about the importance of reporting? A stronger social norm around intervening when a child appears to be in danger? Different assumptions about whose child is worth calling the police for? We cannot answer those questions in the abstract. But we can hold them. We can let them inform how we behave when we are in a similar situation. We can commit to being the person who makes the call, who does not assume someone else will handle it, who acts on what we see rather than talking ourselves out of acting. That is one concrete thing that comes out of stories like Asha's. The reminder that when you see something, you say something. That the call you make might be the call that changes everything. I want to talk about hope. This might seem like an odd note to strike in a story about a missing child whose fate has almost certainly been tragic. But hope is actually central to understanding what has driven this investigation and this family for 24 years, and it is worth addressing directly. The hope that has sustained the Degree family is not, primarily, the hope that Asha is alive. The passage of 24 years without a single confirmed sighting or any evidence of her survival has, almost certainly, transformed that original hope into something different. Into the hope for truth. The hope for accountability. The hope that whoever is responsible for what happened to their daughter will be identified and will face the consequences of what they did. This is a different kind of hope from the hope of reunion. It is more somber. More realistic. Harder to hold on to in some ways, because it requires accepting a terrible loss while continuing to fight for something beyond it. But it is also, perhaps, more durable. The hope for justice does not require the miracle of survival. It requires only the slow, relentless, imperfect work of investigation, of science, of law. And 24 years of holding on to that hope has, apparently, been vindicated. The forensic breakthrough of 2024 is what the hope for justice produces when it is combined with the resources and the expertise and the commitment of investigators who refuse to close a case simply because it is old and difficult. Hope, in cases like this, is not passive. It is not simply wishing for something while the world moves on. It is active. It is the choice, made every day by a family and a community and a network of investigators and advocates, to keep going. To keep asking. To keep the pressure on. To refuse to accept that the truth will never be known. 24 years of that kind of hope. And now, at last, something to show for it. There are things we do not say often enough about the families at the center of cold cases, and I want to say some of them now. We do not say often enough how much courage it takes to keep speaking publicly about the worst thing that has ever happened to you. Harold and Aquila Degree have given interviews, have spoken at press conferences, have made public appeals for information, over the course of 24 years. Every one of those moments requires them to go back to the rawest place, to the morning they found Asha's bed empty, to the years of searching, to the long terrible silence. And they have done it because they understood that speaking was part of the work. That visibility was part of the pursuit of justice. That their willingness to keep Asha's story in front of the public was one of the tools available to them. We do not say often enough how isolating this kind of loss is. The social world eventually, necessarily, moves on. Friends and neighbors resume their lives. The community that rallied in 2000 has, over 2 decades, lived and loved and grieved and celebrated in all the ways that communities do. The Degree family has lived through all of that too, but with this absence at the center, this wound that does not close, this constant awareness of what is missing. The loneliness of sustained grief, particularly grief that the broader world has somewhat moved past, is real and it is deep. We do not say often enough that the families of missing children are survivors of ongoing trauma. Not just the initial trauma of the disappearance, but the trauma of every anniversary, every holiday, every life event that occurs in the shadow of the loss. The graduations that do not happen. The birthdays that do not happen. The grandchildren that may never exist because the person who would have had them is gone. And we do not say often enough that the people who sustained this kind of investigation, the law enforcement officers who spent years of their careers on this case, the FBI agents who applied their skills and their commitment to finding the truth, the forensic scientists who worked with evidence that had been waiting for decades for technology to catch up, these people deserve acknowledgement too. Working cold cases is not glamorous work. It is often frustrating, underfunded, underappreciated. The investigators who kept the Asha Degree case alive, who preserved the evidence and pursued the leads and reanalyzed the forensics as new tools became available, made the 2024 breakthrough possible. Their work matters. Let me take you back one final time to the world of Shelby, North Carolina, in the year 2000. Not to the highway or the shed or the darkness, but to the ordinary life that existed before any of that. Shelby in 2000 was a community that was, by most measures, a good place to raise children. It had the qualities that people associate with small-town southern life at its best: community bonds, shared values, an institutional framework of church and school and neighborhood that knitted people together. It had the particular character of a Piedmont textile community, with its history of hard work and collective struggle and the kind of solidarity that develops when people know that their fates are linked. In that community, the Degree family was embedded in the way that families in such places are embedded, through church, through school, through work, through the hundreds of small daily interactions that make up the texture of community life. They were known people. Asha was a known child. Her disappearance was not the disappearance of a stranger but of someone who belonged to the community, which is part of why it cut so deep. And somewhere in that community, someone had been watching. Had been paying attention. Had been present in a way that went beyond what was visible or acknowledged. Had been, over time, building toward the night of February the 14th in 2000. This is the part of the story that is the most disturbing, not just because of what it says about the specific person involved, but because of what it says about the limits of community as a protective force. Communities can keep people safe in many ways. But they cannot keep people safe from the predator who is inside the community, who has learned the rhythms of community life and is using that knowledge to find opportunities. This is one of the hardest truths in the literature on child victimization. The very institutions that we rely on to protect children, families, schools, churches, neighborhoods, can also be the environments in which children are harmed, because those environments provide access and trust that predatory individuals can exploit. Improving child safety means not just protecting children from the stranger outside the fence, but being vigilant about the familiar face inside it. This does not mean treating every adult in a child's life with suspicion. It means building the kinds of institutional safeguards, the kinds of training, the kinds of reporting cultures, that make predatory behavior harder to sustain and easier to detect. It means teaching children the difference between safe secrets and unsafe secrets. It means creating environments where children feel safe reporting uncomfortable behavior by adults. In 2000, in Shelby, North Carolina, those systems were not fully developed. They were not fully developed anywhere, to be honest, awareness of grooming behaviors, of the ways in which predators operate within communities and institutions, was not as widespread or as sophisticated as it has since become. The harm done to Asha Degree is not just the harm of a single crime. It is the harm of a failure of protective systems that has since been improved but can always be improved further. Her story, told honestly and in full, contributes to that improvement. It reminds us why the work of child protection matters, why vigilance matters, why the systems we build to keep children safe must be constantly evaluated and strengthened. In the weeks and months ahead, as the investigation into Asha's disappearance moves toward what appears to be its final phase, there will be more to report. Charges may be filed. Arrests may be made. A trial may occur. The specific facts of what happened on Valentine's Night 2000 may finally be established as legal truth. When that happens, Cold Case Crime Lab will be here. We will cover every development with the same care and the same commitment to accuracy and humanity that we have brought to this story tonight. We will not rush to conclusions before the evidence supports them. We will not name suspects before the legal process has established facts. We will honor the Degree family by treating this case with the seriousness it deserves, and by treating Asha herself as the person she was rather than a symbol or a story element. Because that is the commitment we make to every case we cover. Every person who appears in our stories is a real person, or was a real person, with a real life and real people who loved them. The least we can do is treat them accordingly. And Asha Degree, bright-eyed, funny, cautious, brave, 9 years old and full of life and entirely deserving of the future she never got to have, deserves that treatment more than most. We will keep telling her story until the story reaches its end. And then we will start on the next one. Because there are too many Ashas. Too many families waiting in the dark of not knowing. Too many cases that have been set aside because they are old or difficult or because the victims did not fit the profile of someone the world decided to care about. We care about all of them. That is why we are here. That is why you are here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for spending this time with Asha Degree and with the family and community that has never stopped loving her or fighting for her. Hit that subscribe button. Leave that comment. Share this video. Keep saying her name. Asha Degree. Say it. Remember it. Carry it forward. Justice for Asha. Cold Case Crime Lab, every case deserves a second look. The final word. There is a word that gets used often in the aftermath of cases like this one, and I want to examine it one last time before we truly close. The word is closure. Families of missing children are often asked, by journalists and well-meaning acquaintances alike, whether they expect to find closure. Whether a resolution to the investigation, a name attached to the crime, a verdict in a courtroom, will give them closure. Many of these families push back against the word. Harold Degree himself has expressed, over the years, something like this sentiment, that closure is not quite the right concept for what he and his family are looking for. Because closure implies a door that shuts, a chapter that ends, a completion of something that was unfinished. And the loss of a child is not something that admits of completion. It does not close. It does not end. It becomes part of you, part of who you are and how you move through the world for the rest of your life. What families in this situation often say they want is not closure but clarity. Not an end, but a truth. Not the resolution of grief, but the transformation of uncertainty into something, however painful, that can be known and held and grieved clearly, rather than grieved in the fog of not knowing. In this sense, the 2024 breakthrough in the Asha Degree case is not closure. It is the potential beginning of clarity. The identification of suspects is the first step toward a legal and factual accounting of what happened to Asha Degree. That accounting, when it comes, will not take the grief away from Harold and Aquila Degree. But it will change the nature of what they are grieving. It will give shape and specific weight to a loss that has been, for 24 years, as formless and as enveloping as the darkness of that Valentine's night. It will tell them what happened to their daughter. And that, for this family, after 24 years, is everything. Let us also speak, one final time, about the specific investigative challenge of working a case where the primary victim, the person who could, in theory, tell us everything, is not present to speak. Asha Degree cannot tell us why she left. She cannot tell us who she was going to meet. She cannot tell us what happened when she got there, or what the person who was waiting for her said or did, or how the night ended for her. All of that knowledge went with her into the darkness of February the 14th, 2000, and has not come back. In the absence of the victim's voice, investigators must build a story from fragments. From the physical evidence, the buried items, the trace materials at the scene. From the witness accounts, imperfect, incomplete, the products of human memory operating under the conditions of a rainy night and the divided attention of people going about their own business. From the behavioral evidence, the packed bag, the walk in a specific direction, the running from one vehicle. From the forensic evidence, DNA profiles built from tiny biological traces, profiles that can link a person to a place even when no living witness can do the same. Piece by piece, the story gets reconstructed. It is never complete. It is never as clean as a confession or a first-hand account. It is always an approximation, assembled from the available fragments with the best tools and the best reasoning that investigators can bring to bear. But the fragments, when enough of them are assembled correctly, are enough. They are enough to point to a person. They are enough to support a prosecution. They are enough to establish, in the only forum that matters for the purposes of justice, what happened. The Asha Degree investigation has been, for 24 years, the work of assembling those fragments. The 2024 breakthrough represents the assembling of enough of them, at last, to point clearly at someone. To say, this person was there. This person is connected to what happened to Asha Degree. This person has answers. The work is not done. But the direction is clear. And the people who have devoted years of their professional lives to this case, the investigators, the forensic scientists, the prosecutors who will eventually bring this case to its final legal resolution, deserve to know that the world is watching. That what they do matters. That the truth they are working to establish is truth that people, far beyond Cleveland County and the Shelby community, are waiting for and will receive with the gravity it deserves. The rain that fell on Highway 18 on the night of February the 13th into February the 14th, 2000, has long since dried. The road looks different now than it did then. Development has changed the area in the quarter century since Asha walked it. The shed is gone. The physical landscape has shifted, as landscapes do over time. But the case has not dried. It has not faded. It has not been swallowed by the passage of time in the way that the rain on the highway has been swallowed. It persists. It demands. It continues to call for the truth to be told and the truth to be heard. Asha Degree was 9 years old. She was not a symbol. She was not a statistic. She was a child who woke up in the middle of the night and made a choice and walked out into the dark. Whatever put her in the position of making that choice, whatever combination of manipulation and innocence and trust misplaced and courage misdirected produced that night, she was real. Her life was real. Her family's love for her was real. And the wrong that was done to her was real. We say her name because that is the minimum. We tell her story because it deserves to be told. We keep asking questions because questions, persistently asked, eventually receive answers. The answers for Asha Degree are coming. We will be here when they arrive. Cold Case Crime Lab. Every case deserves a second look. Subscribe. Remember. Say her name. Asha Degree. Always. A note on keeping cold cases alive. The Asha Degree case is one of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of child disappearance cases in the United States that remain unsolved. Some of them have been open for decades. Some of them involve families who have been waiting even longer than the Degree family has been waiting. Some of them are cases that have received even less public attention than Asha's. For all of the reasons we have discussed in this video, reasons of race, of class, of geography, of the particular media dynamics of the era in which the disappearance occurred. Every one of those families is waiting. Every one of those cases has a family at its center that gets up every morning and lives in the terrible suspended state of not knowing. Every one of those cases has evidence sitting somewhere, in evidence rooms, in laboratory freezers, in file cabinets, that may one day yield to the right forensic technique, the right investigator, the right combination of persistence and science and luck. The work of keeping cold cases alive is not glamorous. It is not exciting in the way that active investigations are exciting. It is patient, sustained, unglamorous attention to stories that the world would prefer to file away and forget. It is the work of refusing to let a case become just a number in a database. It is work worth doing. When you subscribe to a channel like Cold Case Crime Lab, you are not just subscribing to content. You are joining a community of people who have decided that the unsolved cases matter. That the forgotten victims matter. That the families who are waiting deserve an audience that is paying attention, asking questions, and refusing to look away. That community has power. Not the power to conduct investigations or to make arrests or to change the course of legal proceedings. But the power of sustained attention. The power of visibility. The power of 1,000 voices, or 10,000, or 100,000, saying, "We remember. We are watching. We are not going to let this be forgotten." In the Asha Degree case, that power has been part of the ecosystem that has sustained the investigation over 24 years. Every podcast episode about her case, every YouTube video, every Reddit thread, every anniversary article, every social media post with her name, all of it has been part of what kept her case from sliding into the category of things the world has moved past. And now, at last, the forensic science has caught up with the sustained attention. The 2024 breakthrough is real. The suspects are identified. The truth is within reach. This is what it looks like when communities refuse to give up. This is what it looks like when people, ordinary people, doing nothing more complicated than watching a video and sharing it and leaving a comment, are part of something larger than themselves. You are part of something larger than yourself right now. Remember that. And keep going. Because Asha Degree's case is moving toward resolution. But the next case, the next family waiting in the dark, the next child who deserves better than the world gave them, is out there. And it needs the same sustained attention. The same refusal to forget. The same community of people who care enough to keep showing up. That is what Cold Case Crime Lab is for. That is why we do this. And that is why we are grateful, every single day, for every single person who watches, who subscribes, who comments, who shares, who carries these stories forward. Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts. Thank you. Cold Case Crime Lab. Every case deserves a second look. One last thing. If you are in the Shelby area, or if you have ever lived in Shelby, or if you know anyone who was in the Cleveland County area in the early months of 2000, and you have information, any information, however small it might seem, about the disappearance of Asha Degree, please contact the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office or the FBI. Tips can also be submitted to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. No piece of information is too small. No memory is too old. 24 years have passed, but the case is active, and investigators are listening. Asha Degree. Disappeared February 14, 2000. Shelby, North Carolina. 9 years old. If you know something, say something. The family is still waiting. The truth is still out there. And it matters. Cold Case Crime Lab, every case deserves a second look.